Outlaw Lawyer.
Welcome back into the Outlaw Lawyers. Morgan Patrick, consumer advocate. I'm joined on set by the Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, managing partners at Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm. Our special guest, Taylor Scruggs-Smith, also an attorney at Whitaker and Hamer. And we are getting into listener questions. And the next one up is separation agreement.
Yeah, so it's another question we get a lot, kind of we're on our family law show, domestic law show here. And another question we always get, again, I'll combine it with a bunch of other questions, but basically we've got a listener who is separated. I am separated. Do I need to have a separation agreement, right? So we've got someone who has made a decision to get separated from their spouse. And well, I guess, Taylor, just tell us what a separation agreement is. We'll start basic.
So a separation agreement is essentially a contract between you and your spouse saying this is how we're going to settle everything that occurred during our marriage. This is how we're going to settle property. This is how we're going to settle kids, child support, alimony, all of it. We do get a lot of questions of people thinking they need one in order to get divorced, and you do not need one. People think you need to have one filed with the court in order to actually get divorced a year later. The court does not need an agreement as proof that you're separated. Once you guys have split up and you're in separate houses, that clock starts for the year you're separated. The date of separation sometimes is fought back and forth because of how it values property, but the court does not need a separation agreement to prove that you're divorced.
Right, so that's a good thing to point out. There is no legal requirement if you're going to get divorced from your spouse. You do have to be separated for a year. We talked about that, but you don't have to have a separation agreement. So it's not anything that's legally required. However,
it's a great idea.
Yeah, they could be pretty handy because they can tackle a few things that need to be tackled, or they can tackle almost everything.
Right, and the good thing about that is in a separation agreement, it is a negotiation between you and your spouse. So instead of going to court and putting it in the party of all this information in the hands of a judge who you have no control over. Right. Your attorneys have no control over. We just fight for the best outcome, but at the end of the day, that judge is making the call, so it's always going to be an uncertainty. Whereas in a separation agreement, you know, okay, I agreed to this term because she's getting this, or he agreed to this term, so I'll get this. Like, you know what the terms are and how you negotiated those terms. And sometimes it's cheaper in the long run because you're not spending a lot of time in court doing hearings about those matters.
Well, I'll give you one example that I see every day. You know, in my day-to-day life at Whitaker and Hamer, I deal with a lot of real estate transactions, and so you've got a couple who's decided to get separated. A lot of times, at least one of those folks is about to go buy a new house because they're gonna separate and they're gonna create a new household, and it's really hard to buy a new house if you don't want your spouse involved. In North Carolina, spouses have certain marital interest in real property until you're divorced. And so that presents a problem. If you're going to go buy a new house, you're going to get a mortgage. Sometimes your lender, sometimes your closing attorney will want your spouse that you've separated from to sign some paperwork or have something done. And so even a bare bones basic, we don't have to figure everything out. Separation agreement will have what we call free trader language in it.
Yes, and free trader language is very important. Free trader language essentially says that you can go out and buy property without your spouse, and they're waiving all rights they would usually have to it. Because the presumption in North Carolina is that anything bought during the marriage is marital property. And that's a pretty big presumption to overcome. So it has to be a written express waiver that they're not taking rights in your new home. In that same aspect, we get a lot of people that are selling that marital home that they used to live in. And if you want those proceeds to split up in a certain way, attorneys like us need some type of written agreement saying we're splitting the proceeds 60-40, 50-50, because otherwise the rule is we split it half and half even if you agreed otherwise.
I always like that term, free trader.
Yeah, it's a cool term. Yeah, it is. And going back to something you said, talking about the value of that separation agreement, if you've got things that are contentious, if you've got things that you are contesting with your spouse, you're either going to amicably agree and you're going to put it into a separation agreement where you guys, like you said, each have some say, or the alternative is it's going to be a judge's order. That's
right.
It. And like you said, you can make your suggestions, you can plead your case, But at the end of the day, you know, retaining some control over that as opposed to everything just being dictated by that order is almost 100% of the time going to be preferable. And now you might get in a situation where you have a person that you can't talk to,
right.
and it just is what it is at that point.
Right.
But if at all possible, even if you got to make some concessions, you know, the separation agreement route is going to give you more control over the outcome.
And I try to tell people that when it comes to separation agreements, it's not about you coming out with what you think you should have out of marriage. Neither one of these parties are going to be happy about this split and how all the money in the house and everything happens. The goal is to get you both to a place where you are at least acceptable and can live with it.
Right.
Versus being like your best, this is my dream version of how this happens.
Because it could be worse.
Right.
It could always be worse, you know.
Not
Make some
always.
sacrifices. It could always be worse. I'm not saying it will. Like,
I don't know if it's the attorney in me but I've always been one of those guys who's like, control what you can control. And, you know, and a separation agreement, as long as everybody's willing, again, if you're dealing with someone who's, you know, irrational or, you know, not willing to even negotiate, then there's nothing you can do. But if there's anything you can agree on, like a separation agreement, you could agree on tons of stuff. You could agree on child custody.
Yes.
You could child support, post-separation support. You can split up everything. Like you could take care of your whole divorce besides the actual divorce.
Mm-hmm.
You can take care of all your assets, everything in a separation agreement as long as the two parties are agreeable. Now, you've got two people who are parting ways, and so it's not always agreeable. And like you said, Taylor, it's hard to find a scenario unless you just got a ton of assets where everybody's going to walk away feeling like they didn't get
screwed over.
Yeah, ripped off, or you know, it's just the way it is. A lot of emotions running hot, you know, even with reasonable people. But you can take care of a lot of stuff in a separation agreement. And in theory, you're getting separated. Everybody wants to kind of get on with their lives, you know, and a separation agreement will allow you to go buy a house.
Right.
Right. We'll allow everyone to know where we stand with the kids and the schedule, and you can kind of function without a lot of this stuff being up in the air.
you're waiting a year minimum for your divorce.
Minimum.
And that separation agreement can be done day one after you separate, in theory. So it can allow a lot of the healing and that process of moving on to start.
Sometimes those separation agreements are even done prior to you actually splitting up and moving out. Like, okay, we know this is what we're about to do.
Sure.
So while we're still working with each other, we're going to go ahead and put this in here, put this as our anticipated date of separation, and fix everything now. And that's something people do too, which is perfectly fine. The only thing a court can touch after you do a separation agreement is child custody and child support, because that's always going to be in the judge's jurisdiction until the kids are 18.
And that being said, that's true, but at the same time, you can handle those matters by way of a separation agreement. And if both parties agree on that, no one can test it down the line, there's no change of circumstances, and that's going to hold up. So again, the more that you can control, the better. So,
and it's, a separation agreement, it's not a magical document. When we talk about a separation agreement, it's a contract between two people. It's governed by contract
so
law.
Enforcement can be an issue.
So you would, like, a party could breach it, right? If somebody doesn't make their post-separation payment by a certain date, they've breached a contract, and that's the remedy there, right? You would sue somebody for breach.
And a lot of separation agreements will say if you sue and you win and you had to fight for breach, you get your attorney's fees.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's worth having all of that written out. And like you said, even when it comes to the kids, you're waiting a year. The court's going to make you go to mediation anyway.
Right.
Yeah, you're separate from your spouse for a year, like you said. And if you've got kids, like, something's going to have to happen with your kids.
Right.
So it's either the court, like you said, is going to be dictating that ahead of time, or you're going to come to some agreement that, while it may not be perfect, you're at least going to have some say in it.
And even when you file in court for child custody, the court forces you to go to mediation first. The court wants you to work it out. So you might as well start.
Yeah, and again, there's a caveat. If your significant other is just one of those folks who's unreasonable, not in a good place, or there's some other things going on, it might be tough, and you might be in court, looking for a judge's assistance to kind of get things moving along. But hopefully, in our situation, we're giving our listener a pretty good situation where
we're assuming they can work together.
Yeah. But separation agreements are handy, and I really think it enables you. Again, you got a year to wait. but it enables you to kind of move on with your life, kind of get your ducks in a row and kind of get to that next step.
The Outlaw Lawyers, what's up next?
More divorce.
More family law.
We're killing off a lot of families today.
More family law. The Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer. Whitaker and Hamer Law Firms, where you can find them. They're the managing partners there. They're also practicing attorneys here in the great state of North Carolina. Our special guest is Taylor Scruggs-Smith. Makes us look so much better since you're able to view us. If you have a legal question of your own and you need answers, I have a phone number for you, 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Just leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about. An attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. You can always email the program, questions@theoutlawlawyer.com, and we'll get to that in a future program.